My name is Fiona Harlow. I'm 35 years old, and last New Year's Eve, I sat entirely alone in my cramped apartment while my family toasted the holiday in my deceased grandmother's home. They fought over that estate like rabid wolves when she passed. I was the only one left off the guest list. I was the one who had lived there for 3 grueling years, tracking her clinical vitals, holding her hand through the terrifying nights. And my family decided I didn't belong at the table. At 11:59 p.m., exactly 60 seconds before midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a scheduled message from my grandmother, buried 9 months prior. My darling, go to the cellar behind the heavy mahogany bookcase. The combination is your birthday. What I uncovered behind that bookcase didn't just alter my new year. It shattered 3 people's lives as they knew them, beginning with mine. Welcome back to their secret stories, where family secrets are dragged into the light and quiet souls finally find their voice. If tales of standing up to wolves speak to you, you are exactly where you need to be. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from, and make sure to subscribe. Now let me take you back to the beginning. 3 years ago, I moved into my grandmother's house on Sycamore Ridge. Genevieve Harlow was 85 then. She had progressive muscular atrophy, advanced restrictive lung disease, and a stubborn streak wider than the Columbia River. Somebody had to be there. I was an ICU nurse with 12 years of grueling night shifts behind me, no husband, no kids, and a lease I could easily break. So I packed up and moved. Nobody else in the family stepped up. They just agreed, with quiet relief, that it made perfect sense for me. I worked the night shifts at the hospital and spent my daylight hours with her. I documented everything out of professional habit. Every dose of medication, every oxygen level, every near slip I corrected. In nursing, we have a golden rule: if it isn't documented, it never happened. Hold on to that line. It becomes a weapon later. And here is the truth. Those 3 years weren't a miserable sacrifice. Genevieve did her daily acrostic puzzles in heavy ink every morning, throwing a glare if anyone dared offer a pencil. On New Year's Eve, we drank sparkling white grape, juice from her late husband's crystal flutes, because she never touched a drop of liquor. She remembered my birthday every single year, November 12th, with a hand-signed card placed on my pillow. My own parents usually managed a text around the 15th. My Aunt Patricia. She never remembered at all. Patricia visited once a month on a Saturday afternoon, staying precisely as long as it took to sip 1 cup of Earl Grey tea. She'd peck Genevieve on the cheek, complain about inflation, and somehow always walk out with one of Genevieve's personal checks tucked into her leather handbag. I watched. I remained silent. That was my first mistake, and I paid for it with everything I owned. The summer I moved in, Patricia drew up the legal documents, financial power of attorney, naming herself sole agent. She pitched it to the family over a dry roast chicken dinner as if she were doing me a massive favor. Wealth is a family burden, sweetie. You just focus on the medical side. I want to be transparent. I saw the warning sign. I wasn't blind. I sat my father down that exact week and recommended we appoint a neutral, licensed fiduciary, someone professional, bonded, whose sole job was to manage an elderly parent's assets with legal oversight. Dad stared at me like I'd suggested putting cameras in the church confessional. Patricia runs a successful consulting firm, Fiona. She knows how to handle ledgers. Don't make this ugly. My mother chimed in with her usual refrain. Don't rock the boat, honey. 2 against 1. And Genevieve signed what her children slid in front of her because at 85 you choose your battles, and she was hoarding her energy for the final fight. I couldn't block it. I had 0 legal standing, no authority, and no allies. So I did what any good nurse does. I kept watching, and I kept my own shadow records. What I didn't know then was that Genevieve was keeping her own records, too. She had a green leather journal tucked in her nightstand drawer. I assumed she was writing down hard puzzle patterns or recipes. She'd write in it late at night, slow, deliberate strokes of ink, while I thought she was winding down. One evening that autumn, she watched me organize her weekly medication dispenser and said something I brushed off as sweet senility. "When the hour comes, remember your birthday matters to me. Nothing in this house is an accident." I kissed her brow and turned out the light. It took me 2 more years to decode what she meant. The Thanksgiving before she passed, while Genevieve was resting upstairs, I asked the family for financial support. I had sat up at 3:00 a.m. after a grueling double shift running the numbers. The math didn't care about my pride. The part-time home health aide I had been funding entirely out of my own salary, 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, cost Vern $500 every month. I wasn't asking them to empty bedpans. I was asking 4 grown adults to split an ongoing medical expense. My Aunt Patricia set down her wine glass and laughed. An actual mocking laugh. "Paige, you were just doing what family does. Fiona." My father stared into his mashed potatoes like they held the secrets of the universe. My mother patted my arm and whispered, "Don't turn this into a scene." And then, I swear to you, they shifted the conversation to the retaining wall. The property needed a structural foundation, reinforcement 26 sexozoans, and suddenly everyone was bursting with ideas and enthusiasm. Patricia had a preferred contractor. Dad knew an excavator who owed him a favor. They debated that retaining wall for 45 minutes because it protected the physical house, and the house had a tangible appraisal value they could split. My endless night shifts had no line item on their balance sheet. I cleared the dinner plates because someone had to. And as I stood at the kitchen sink, a cold realization washed over me. In this family, love was a currency, and I had been paying in a denomination they simply didn't accept. Upstairs, Genevieve hadn't been sleeping. The heating vent in her bedroom was positioned directly over the dining room table. Sound traveled perfectly in that old house. That night, after the driveway cleared, she asked me to hand her the phone directory. She dialed Alistair Vance, her personal attorney of 30 years. Through her closed door, I caught only a single sentence. "Alistair, I've seen enough." In late January, Genevieve spiked a sudden, raging fever. A severe kidney infection common at her age, which clouded her mind the way acute infections often do with the elderly. She was admitted to Oakwood Valley Hospital. For nearly 2 weeks, she was disoriented, fragile, drifting back to memories from 40 years ago. The clinical term is ICU delirium. Her hospital chart documented it day by day, in black and white. I know this because reading medical charts is my livelihood. Delirium is a temporary state. It recedes once the infection clears. Any qualified doctor or nurse will tell you exactly that. But Patricia saw a tactical window. She told the rest of the family that I had been suffocating Genevieve for years, and that my grandmother needed clinical distance to recuperate. Patricia was the power of attorney, the oldest daughter, the one with the legal signature. Suddenly, a rigid visiting schedule appeared on the hospital door in Patricia's neat, loopy handwriting. My name was allotted for exactly 3 hours on Thursday afternoons. I fought it through the proper channels. I phoned Genevieve's attending physician to put my clinical concerns on record. I requested a formal capacity assessment from the hospital social worker. Flagging the toxic family dynamics, the social worker was sympathetic but restricted. "Visiting schedules are a private family matter, Ms. Harlow. Your aunt holds the legal power of attorney. There is no clinical basis to intervene. I have replayed that January in my mind 1,000 times. and I still don't know what more I could have done without a court order. On my designated Thursday, walking down the long corridor toward her room, I glanced through the glass partition. My father was sitting at Genevieve's bedside. He was holding a thick manila folder, pressing a heavy pen into her trembling, weak hand. Genevieve came home in February, her mind completely clear again, though her body was fading. She drew her last breath on March 9th in her own bed, with me administering her comfort medications and holding her hand. She was 88. The funeral was a blur of white lilies and condolences, with Aunt Patricia standing at the entrance of the house, like she'd already mapped out the renovations. 1 week later, she revealed the new will. It wasn't the document Alastair Vance had drafted. It was a new version executed in mid-February, signed in the hospital during the exact week her medical records proved she was in a state of severe delirium. It named Patricia as sole executor. It left the Sycamore Ridge property entirely to Patricia, and it contained a specific clause I will hear echoing in my head forever. A statement about Genevieve's fear of isolation and the undue, controlling influence of her granddaughter, who restricted her daily life. They took 3 years of selfless nursing care and twisted it into an elder abuse narrative. The previous will, the genuine one from 2 years prior, had bequeathed the home to me and divided the remaining savings equally among her children. Patricia stood among the funeral arrangements and labeled that original document the product of manipulation. And here is what shattered something deep inside me. My parents chose to believe her. My own father looked me in the eye and said, "You were in that house every day, Fiona." People are going to raise questions. 10 days later, a formal letter arrived from Patricia's legal counsel on heavy cream cardstock. It was written in a tone of polite malice. If I chose to contest the February will, the family would feel compelled to report their concerns regarding patient exploitation to the State Board of Nursing, my license, my career, every patient I had left to care for in this life. I read that letter standing in the very kitchen where I had lovingly pureed her food, and I realized the game had rules I had never agreed to play. I didn't just roll over. I want that understood. I retained my own lawyer, Cynthia Mercer. She gave it to me straight the same raw way I prepare families in hospice care. A probate contest will cost you between $45,000 and $65,000, Cynthia told me. It will drag on for at least 18 months. You have exactly $8,500 in savings. And that board complaint is a lethal weapon. Even a baseless accusation triggers a formal investigation. While it's active, you are professional poison. Your hospital will put you on suspension. They have to. You can be entirely in the right and still end up bankrupt and ruined. She looked at me with pity. That is the trap they designed for you. In October, I signed the settlement. I waived all claims to the estate. In return, the family signed an agreement to file no licensing complaints and make no public allegations. My father patted my shoulder outside the law office as if I'd achieved a major victory. You did the honorable thing, Fi. For the sake of family peace turned out to have a highly selective guest list. In November, Patricia took official possession of the Sycamore Ridge house and immediately swapped out the locks on the doors. I relocated to a cramped one-bedroom apartment above an old bookstore downtown, 15 minutes away. I had a mattress, a coffee pot, and a single cardboard box of things nobody else claimed, including Genevieve's old brass keyring, which I kept the way you keep a departed soul's spectacles, out of pure sentiment, or so I believed. Christmas arrived and departed with a generic card from my mother containing no invitation. And then came December 31st. From my window above the bookstore, I watched the heavy snow begin to fall. Somewhere across town, My family was gathering in my grandmother's living room to raise a glass to a year that had served them extraordinarily well, which returns us to 11:59 p.m. and a message from a dead woman. The notification chimed at precisely 11:59 p.m. It came from an unrecognized number via a secure digital delivery service, the kind where a law firm programs a delayed dispatch, verified and timestamped with a legal signature. Vance, Hayes and Partners. I read the text 4 times before my fingers stopped shaking. My darling, if you are reading this, they are celebrating in my house, and you are not there. I knew they would do this, which is why I scheduled this for tonight. Because by now you will finally believe me. Go to the cellar behind the heavy mahogany bookcase. The combination is your birthday. Take everything. Trust Alastair, Grandma. Outside, a few blocks away, early fireworks cracked against the winter sky. I sat on the edge of my mattress with my coat half on, debating with myself like a madwoman. The house was no longer mine. The locks had been changed. It was midnight on New Year's Eve, and a deceased woman had just assigned me a mission. I called Alastair Vance's office and got their holiday voicemail, his gravelly voice promising a response on January 2nd. Then I looked at the keyring hanging by my door, and I remembered a detail Patricia didn't know, because Patricia had never spent a freezing winter in that house. The front door wasn't the only entrance. The old wooden cellar storm doors on the side of the foundation, nestled beneath a wild rose bush, were secured with a heavy brass padlock older than my father. The small, tarnished key for it lived on my ring. I have escorted hundreds of souls to the end of their journeys. And I can tell you this, the dying do not waste their final words. The lights at Sycamore Ridge went dark around 1:00 a.m. At 1:20, I parked 2 blocks away and walked through the fresh snow. The padlock resisted for a heartbeat, then yielded with a heavy metallic click. I hoisted the heavy wooden door against the falling snow and descended into the pitch-black cold. It smelled of damp stone, heating oil, and decades of forgotten holiday decorations. I switched on my phone flashlight. Patricia had already been down here, sweeping her new empire. The storage crates were neatly stacked, each one labeled in her aggressive, loopy script with the names of the cousins, distributing the family heritage she now controlled. There used to be a strip of gray tape with my name written in Genevieve's hand on one of those boxes. It had been scraped off. Nothing left but a sticky, rectangular outline on the cardboard. I stood in the freezing dark and allowed myself to feel that sting for exactly 5 seconds. In clinical nursing, you learn to schedule your grief. Then I located the bookcase. It was a massive mahogany structure, heavy as an anvil, crammed with dusty paperbacks and old encyclopedias. It took me 10 minutes of inspection to find the mechanism. The shelf didn't sit flush against the wall. There were painted over hinges on the left frame. If you lifted the right side while pulling forward, the entire unit swung outward like a door. Behind it, embedded directly into the old stone foundation, was a charcoal gray steel safe with a dial. I knelt in the dirt in my heavy winter coat. 1112. My birthday. Not my father's. Not Patricia's. Not even her own mine. The brass handle turned. The heavy door swung open, and my flashlight beam trembled across the contents. A green leather journal, a thick accordion folder with typed index tabs, and 2 sealed envelopes written in her elegant script. The first envelope, read for your armor. The second, to dismantle them, only if required. I didn't open a single page down there. I packed everything into my leather tote bag, snapped photos of the empty safe and the displaced bookcase, secured the cellar doors, and drove back to my apartment with a heart rate I would have immediately medicated in an ICU patient. At my kitchen table, with the faint hum of the bookstore below me, I opened the first envelope for your armor. The first document was a stack of bank ledgers addressed to Genevieve Harlow, requested personally by her. Her own private copies, which no power of attorney could block her from ordering, highlighted in thick yellow marker, line after line, were unauthorized withdrawals and wire transfers executed under Patricia's power of attorney, starting the exact month Patricia acquired her signature. Worth 500 here, 4,000 there. A systematic, quiet siphoning totaling nearly 42,000 over 3 years. Every single transaction bore the handwritten initials PW. Beneath those lay 3 official promissory notes, legally drafted and signed by Patricia Whitmore over a span of 8 years, and 12,000 to 18,000 the 25,000. 55,000 in personal loans from her mother, with not a single cent repaid. Then a sealed medical envelope from Oakwood Valley Hospital. When I pulled the contents out, I gasped. Genevieve had exercised her rights as a patient and obtained her complete medical records from that January admission. The chart from February 11th, the exact afternoon the forged will was supposedly signed. Documented, acute delirium, positive confusion assessment method, disoriented to time and place. Any estate attorney in the country would frame that page. And finally, a formal letter on Vance. Hayes and Partners letterhead dated March 1st, confirming Mrs. Harlow's appointment to legally execute a revocation of the hospital signed instrument. The appointment was scheduled for March 17th. She had passed away on the 9th. She had missed saving herself by a mere 8 days. At the bottom of the folder lay a letter written on her fine personal stationery, dated the final week of February. Read me first, my darling. The front envelope said. I was already past that, which was classic Genevieve, knowing I would analyze the clinical evidence before allowing myself to feel the loss. Fiona, if Alistair's digital message delivered, it is New Year's Eve. They are celebrating in my home, and you are sitting alone. I am so deeply sorry. I saw what they were doing far longer than you realize. I saw every check Patricia slipped into her purse. I heard what they muttered at Thanksgiving through the floor vent, about the foundation wall, about what family does. I saw the papers they forced into my hands while I was weak in that hospital bed. I could not stop them while I drew breath. Every time I tried, they moved faster than my failing limbs. So, I kept a record. I was an educator, my dear. I always knew who did the actual work and who merely copied the homework. I chose tonight for this delivery because grief breeds blind loyalty, and you have always been loyal past the point of reason. By New Year's, you will finally see them for who they are. In this folder is everything an honest judge needs. In the other envelope is more, and I pray to God you never have to open it. But I know my children. Use the first to clear your name. Open the second only if they refuse to stop. The life insurance policy is to cover Cynthia's fees. It is for the battle, not for peace. You have spent your entire life trying to earn a seat at a table that was never going to be offered to you. Stop earning, my darling. Protect yourself first. With all my love, all my life. Grandma. Folded inside was a paid-up life insurance policy, 60,000 payable immediately upon death. The sole beneficiary, Fiona Harlow. I saved the green leather journal for last. It wasn't legal evidence, it was a witness. Page after page in her elegant, steady handwriting, 3 years of entries. But she hadn't been logging her symptoms or medication schedules. She had been documenting me. January 8th. Fiona worked a 12-hour shift, still insisted on driving me to Dr. Kapoor's clinic, slept upright in the waiting room chair, then tried to tell me she wasn't tired. Beautiful layer. March 3rd. Fiona sold her grandmother's heirloom brooch. A new automated recliner arrived on Tuesday. She thinks I believe in happy accidents. June 12th. Patricia visited for 40 minutes, left with a signed check, Fiona visited no one. She lives here. She is the check. It went on like that. Microscopic, exact. The moral ledger my family never bothered to keep. The one where grueling night shifts held value. Where pureed meals and sleepless nights counted. Where sold brooches counted. On the final written page, in ink that wavered but never faltered, she had penned a single sentence larger than the rest. They counted everything except what actually counted. I sat above the quiet bookstore as the snow drifted past the street lamp, clutching that journal the way I had held her hand on her final day. Tucked between the rear pages was a sealed birthday card with my name on it, dated in February for the November birthday she knew she wouldn't live to see. She had bought it 8 months in advance. Inside, beneath a picture of painted wildflowers, was one hand-written sentence. The house was never theirs to inherit. At 200 a.m., I didn't fully comprehend the legal weight of those words. It sounded like a poetic expression of love. It turned out to be a matter of statutory law. But before any of that, there was still the second envelope. It sat unopened on my laminate table like a loaded firearm. I picked up to dismantle them, only if required, and turned it over under the bulb. It was thick, rigid, with the edges of what felt like photocopied documents shifting inside, and the outline of a photograph pressing against the paper. My thumb hovered over the seal, and then I stopped. In emergency medicine, we have a strict clinical protocol. You never administer the strongest medication first. You begin with what the clinical moment demands, monitor the response, and keep the heavy narcotics locked in the cabinet, because once they are injected, they cannot be retrieved. Genevieve had written only if required with such force that the pen had grooved the cardstock. She had known her children, but she had also known me. Known that on the darkest night of my year, I might tear it open simply to feel armed. So I left it sealed. I placed it in the fireproof security box where I keep my passport and my nursing license, sliding the box deep under my bed. And if you think that required no effort, you have never been starved for a weapon at 2 o'clock in the morning. I lay awake until the heat from the bookstore downstairs began to warm my floorboards, thinking of a safe that unlocked on my birthday and a woman who had orchestrated her own defense from a hospital mattress. Quick pause, because this is where you come in. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who gave up your nights while everyone else showed up for the family photographs, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now under the name Their Secret Stories, because what my family did when they found out that safe was empty, you will want to hear with your own ears. Where were we? Right. January 2nd, 800 a.m. I was standing outside a legal office with a tote bag full of my grandmother's artillery and a locked security box under my bed. I was desperately trying to forget. The second envelope remained sealed for 91 days. Cynthia Mercer's office smelled of stale black coffee and hard legal strategy. She read through the contents for 2 solid minutes in absolute silence. Bank ledgers, promissory notes, the Oakwood Valley chart, the letter from Alistair's office regarding the canceled revocation appointment. I watched her lawyer face, which is a very real mask, much like a nurse's face, and I saw it crack twice. Acute delirium documented on the exact date of execution, she murmured, straightening the pages. A revocation appointment scheduled before she passed, and a POA siphoning tens of thousands of dollars. Fiona, settlements secured through active fraud do not stand. Nothing you signed in October holds if this is authenticated. Then she laid out the legal reality. Cynthia never promised easy victories. We have to verify everything through Alistair Vance. We secure an emergency preservation order on the property. The safe and the structure before any evidence accidentally vanishes. Then we petition the probate court to reopen the estate on grounds of fraud. It will be slow, public, and highly contentious. Your name will be listed right next to theirs on the public court docket. Are you prepared for that? I thought of the scraped-off tape, the gray adhesive ghost of my name on that cardboard box. They erased my name first, I replied. She almost smiled. Then she asked the standard attorney question. Is this everything? Everything that was in the safe? And I heard myself say, for now. Cynthia studied me for a long beat, chose not to push, and made a note on her legal pad. It was the first lie I'd told in years, delivered with the steady calm of a routine pulse check. Oregon law is incredibly meticulous about wills. A valid testament requires two competent witnesses to be physically present in the room, watching the testator sign. The February will bore 2 witness signatures. The first was Lillian Thorne, Patricia's close friend from church, a woman who practically notarized parish gossip. The second was a name completely foreign to our family, Arthur Pendleton. Cynthia pulled the thread. Because the estate was now in formal litigation, she had the power to subpoena records. Her first target was the visitor log at Oakwood Valley Hospital for February 11th. Hospitals document everyone. Badge in, badge out, computerized timestamps. No exceptions. The electronic log for Genevieve's unit that afternoon showed exactly one visitor to her room between 100 p.m. and 6000 p.m. said Patricia Whitmore. From 20:15 p.m. to 40:40 p.m. no Lillian Thorne, no Arthur Pendleton. The will claim to have been signed at 3:30 p.m. 2 witnesses had sworn under penalty of perjury that they watched Genevieve Harlow sign the document. The hospital's own security records proved neither of them was even in the building. Cynthia tracked down Arthur Pendleton within 48 hours. He was a 61-year-old retiree living in Burlington, the former cubicle neighbor from the corporate consulting firm where Patricia had worked for nearly 2 decades. When Cynthia contacted him by phone, he went completely silent, then stammered that he would have to call her back. In legal terms, that is the sound of thin ice snapping. He had never set foot in Oakwood Valley Hospital. He would eventually admit as much under oath. That night, I wrote a single line in my own journal. A habit inherited from Genevieve found the loose thread. Her name is on the log. Theirs aren't. Patricia discovered the empty safe on a Tuesday in late January. I knew because of the dust. She had gone down to the cellar to inventory her stolen kingdom. The thick dust on that mahogany bookcase told a clear story: fresh drag marks, a swung hinge, and a safe door standing wide open to reveal nothing but shadows. My phone lit up before dinner. First, my mother, weeping before I could even greet her. Whatever you took from Patricia's property, please just return it. She's talking about calling the authorities. Patricia's property. 10 months, and it was already Patricia's property. Then came a text from Patricia herself, sent because she wanted to intimidate me and lacked the foresight to fear a paper trail breaking and entering. Grand theft. 1 phone call and your career is over, sweetheart. I forwarded the screenshots to Cynthia, who read them and replied excellent. Let her keep typing. Then Patricia did exactly what I knew she would do. Because bullies always swing the heaviest club in their reach. She filed a formal complaint with the Oregon Board of Nursing. Patient exploitation, financial abuse, undue influence over a compromised adult, the precise allegations she had legally promised in the October settlement never to raise. Within 7 days, the hospital placed me on administrative suspension. It was done with genuine kindness, with apologies, with a reassuring hand on my shoulder from a nursing director who had supervised my charting for 12 years. But suspension is suspension. They confiscated my security badge at the door. I sat in my sedan in the cold parking lot, staring at the hands that had bathed the terminally ill and comforted grieving families, hands that my aunt had just legally classified as weapons. She believed that taking my livelihood would force me to my knees. She forgot who had taught me how to read a chart, and she had just destroyed the only legal agreement shielding her from her own crimes. That night was the absolute nadir, and I won't sugarcoat it. No shifts to wake up for, savings evaporating into rent and groceries. My mother's voice on my voicemail pleading with me to make peace with the woman who was systematically destroying my life. I sat on the hardwood floor of my apartment with the security box resting between my knees, Genevieve's letter open in my hands. Protect yourself first, my darling. I had been reading that sentence as a warning about their malice. Sitting on that cold floor, suspended and isolated, I finally understood the deeper meaning. Protect yourself first didn't mean hide. I had been hiding for 3 years behind duty, behind professionalism, behind being the daughter who never caused a scene. They had stolen the estate anyway, stolen the family narrative anyway. And now my career. Remaining passive had a flawless record of destroying me. First does not mean only, and it doesn't mean last. It means prioritizing your survival before their comfort, before my father's reputation, before a seat at a table that was a lie. I returned the second envelope to the lockbox, still sealed, but I stopped pretending it wasn't a loaded gun. Then I called Cynthia at 10 o'clock at night. She answered on the second ring, as if she'd been sitting by her phone since New Year's Eve. File it, I said. The petition, everything. Monday morning, she replied, and I could hear her pen scratching the notepad. At 11:00 p.m., she called back, a move lawyers rarely make unless the tectonic plates have shifted. Alistair Vance just returned from his winter home in Palm Springs. She said, her voice tight. Fiona, he's been waiting for your call since the ball dropped on New Year's. He says your grandmother told him you would come. Alistair Vance is the sort of old school attorney who still keeps carbon copies in an oak drawer just in case digital systems collapse. He met us at his office on a freezing Saturday morning, wearing an old woolen cardigan. When I placed the folder on his desk, he touched the paper as if it were a monument. She sat right in that chair, he murmured twice. Once in November after a family gathering, once by phone from her hospital bed in February. He confirmed every detail in the flat. Unemotional tone of a professional reading facts he wished were smaller. The 2-year-old will, bequeathing the home to me and splitting the liquid assets among the children, was the final, legally valid instrument he had ever drafted for her. In February, she had phoned him from Oakwood Valley, sharp and resolute once the infection cleared, warning him that papers had been forced into her hands during her delirium and that she required an immediate revocation. He had scheduled the appointment for the 17th. She died on the 9th. His contemporaneous phone logs detailed the entire conversation. The delayed text service had been her idea. He said she'd read about secure digital scheduling in a legal journal and decided it was more reliable than a posthumous letter. He peered at me over his spectacles. Genevieve didn't want vengeance, Miss Harlow. She wanted the truth preserved. She told me you were the only one in the family who valued the difference. Then he opened his heavy office safe. I stopped breathing. Inside was an identical, sealed copy of every document I had found. Bank ledgers, logs, the chart, his own notes. Your grandmother believed in a backup plan, he said. Whatever happens to your copies, mine were never inside that house. For the first time in a year, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. You need to meet Miriam Kelly. Because every story of this kind has a Miriam, and nobody ever mentions them in the obituary. Miriam was the part-time home health aide I had hired entirely out of my own pocket. The $400 monthly expense my family had dismissed with a shrug at Thanksgiving. She worked 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, so I could sleep like a normal human being. Miriam signed her sworn affidavit at Cynthia's office during her brief break between caring for 2 other elderly patients. She swore to what she had witnessed over 2 years. Genevieve Harlow sharp, alert at home, solving puzzles in ink and correcting Miriam's grammar for amusement. Confused only once, during that January hospitalization when the sepsis took hold, because Miriam had visited her there, too, on her own personal time, a gesture of love that families often ignore. Miriam swore to Patricia's monthly, brief visits lasting under an hour, and to the fact that I had never once touched Genevieve's checkbook. The power of attorney lady handled every cent. Miriam's statement read, Fiona handled everything money can't buy. While she capped her pen, Miriam told me something that has remained with me ever since. Years ago, another wealthy family had accused her of stealing a diamond ring. The ring was later found in the lining of the deceased woman's winter coat at the dry cleaners. Nobody ever apologized. They always accused the hands that washed the dishes, she said, completely devoid of bitterness, just tired of being surprised. Then she reached into her purse and slid her phone across the table, displaying a text thread from the spring before Genevieve died. From Patricia, do not discuss finances with my niece. She is not family in that regard. Cynthia photographed the screen with methodical calm. The way you handle an object that has just been transformed into a smoking gun. And then Miriam shared one final detail in the parking lot. The first week of March, Genevieve had asked Miriam to help her down to the cellar twice with a heavy folder and 2 envelopes, keeping the errand entirely confidential. Her hands could no longer operate the combination lock. My hands could, Miriam said softly. I never asked what was inside. You don't ask a dying teacher if she's finished grading the papers. On the first Monday of February, Cynthia filed the formal petition with the county probate court. Reopen the estate of Genevieve Harlow. Nullify the October settlement as the product of active fraud. Invalidate the February will due to fraudulent execution, lack of mental capacity on the date of signing, and undue influence. Every single word became public record. In our small county, the court docket is published every Thursday in the local newspaper, sandwiched between the high school sports scores and the obituaries. There is a specific phenomenon that occurs in a tight-knit town when a prominent family's name hits that column. It happens with terrifying speed. By Friday, the members of the garden club had gone completely silent around my mother. Her social circle quietly postponed the annual spring charity luncheon she had hosted in her living room for 9 consecutive years. She called me, weeping hysterically, and for once she wasn't asking me to surrender to Patricia. Everyone is staring at us, Fiona. Your father won't even go to the hardware store. Then Dad called. His voice had the low, commanding resonance I had obeyed my entire life. Withdraw the petition. You are dragging our family name through the mud, Fi. I stood at my window, watching a delivery truck idle in the slush below, and I felt the old, deeply ingrained reflex to apologize. It's a muscle, that instinct. 35 years of rigorous training. And then, for the first time,
No, Dad,
I said quietly. I'm not dragging our name through the mud. I'm just reading it back to you. He hung up. I stood in the quiet of my apartment, realizing that the girl who would have broken a year ago was completely gone, and there was no legal petition that could ever bring her back. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Patricia would reach for the gasoline. She countersued within 2 weeks. I'll give her credit for sheer audacity. she filed a civil suit against me for criminal trespass on New Year's Eve, conversion of the contents of the safe, and the centerpiece of her attack, a claim that I had misappropriated 190,000 of Genevieve's funds during my 3 years of care. Cynthia laid out the financial ledgers across her conference table like a surgeon preparing tools. And then she did the thing I respect her most for. She cross-referenced the numbers against Genevieve's highlighted bank records. The home health aid, paid by my personal checks. The specialty medication. The wheelchair ramp, the automated chair. All paid from my savings, supported by physical receipts. The structural foundation. 26,000. Paid from Genevieve's account, authorized and signed by Patricia herself under her power of attorney, and roughly 110,000 of the missing. Funds matched. Down to the single dollar, the unauthorized cash withdrawals initialed PW, and the 3 outstanding promissory notes, bearing Patricia's signature. Cynthia leaned back in her chair, a cold smile on her lips. She's suing you to recover the exact money she stole from her own mother. It's almost majestic. Meanwhile, the State Board of Nursing delivered their official notification. Formal investigation opened. 90 days to submit a response. My personal checking account dwindled to less than $3,500. Genevieve's life insurance payout was flowing directly to Cynthia's firm, exactly as my grandmother had intended. For the battle, not for peace. I want to be raw about that late winter period. It was pure terror wrapped in legal stationery. And then in March, exactly 1 year since Genevieve passed, the court ordered mandatory mediation. 4 days before the scheduled session, my father asked me to meet him for dinner. Not at their house. At the Clockwork Diner out on Route 109, neutral ground with cracked red vinyl booths, where every painful family truth in this county eventually gets dragged into the light. He ordered black coffee he didn't touch. He looked incredibly old, and I allowed myself to feel that pain. Patricia is prepared to be reasonable, he murmured, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table like a piece of contraband. The family's proposal. Patricia would immediately withdraw the nursing board complaint and dismiss her civil suit. I would receive exactly 1/3 of the home's appraisal value once she put it on the market. In exchange, I would withdraw my probate petition, surrender all files, and let the matter die. We can have Sunday dinners again, Fi, he said, his voice cracking. Your mother misses you. We can have this entire nightmare finished by Easter. I'll admit it to you, because we've walked this dark path together for one fleeting second. That offer was incredibly tempting, 1/3 of a house. My mother's roast chicken, it felt like water in a scorching desert. Then Dad reached across the table, placed his hand over mine, and shattered the illusion. Because he couldn't help but protect his own skin. Some documents are better left burned. For everyone's sake, I looked at his hand resting on mine, he knew. Maybe not the precise details, but he knew there was a second envelope. And he knew his own signature was on something that could destroy him. This dinner, this coffee, this entire meeting. It was a desperate attempt to secure the matches. I drove home, pulled the security box from beneath my mattress, and sat with that sealed envelope under my kitchen light to dismantle them only if required. Not yet. I whispered to the empty room, but I could feel the required, approaching like a thunderstorm over the ridge. 2 days before mediation, Arthur Pendleton sat for his formal deposition, and the ice finally shattered. Cynthia conducted the questioning with a quiet, devastating gentleness. She placed the Oakwood Valley visitor log in front of him, every single electronic badge entry, time-stamped with his name completely absent. Then she placed the February will next to it, and Arthur Pendleton, 61 years old. A retired grandfather with a clean record, looked at that security log for a long, silent minute, and chose his own freedom over Patricia Whitmore's lies. He admitted under oath that he had signed the witness line the following week at Patricia's kitchen table in Burlington, as a personal favor. She had assured him it was a mere administrative formality, that her mother had signed it in her presence, and they just needed the paperwork completed. He had never met Genevieve Harlow. He had never entered Oakwood Valley Hospital. It was transcribed, sworn. Irrevocable Cynthia called me from her car, her voice vibrating with triumph. The February will is dead, Fiona. Fraudulent execution. Everything they built on it is a house of cards in a hurricane. I hung up and stood in the absolute silence of my kitchen. I thought of the birthday card nestled in my drawer. The house was never theirs to inherit. She had known. In February, she had watched them construct a fraud around her hospital bed, and she had already ordered her bank statements and secured her own chart. She had written me a birthday card like a prophecy, because Genevieve Harlow never believed in coincidences. That evening, Patricia's legal counsel requested a private conference with Cynthia prior to the mediation session. The entire family would be present, including my father. The night before mediation, I ironed my hospital scrubs. I know how that sounds. I was still suspended, my security badge locked in a drawer in HR. But as I stood there at midnight, pressing crisp lines into the fabric, I knew it wasn't a costume. It was my identity. It was the truth. I wanted them to see exactly who I was. I keep logs. I remain calm. I survive the night shift. I packed my leather tote bag the way I used to prepare a medical cart. Everything arranged in the precise order of application. The armor folder on top. Bank ledgers, chart pages, visitor logs, the Pendleton transcript, Miriam's affidavit, Alastair's files. The green leather journal in the center, not as a legal exhibit, but as my emotional anchor. I wanted her spirit in that room. And at the very bottom of the bag, still sealed the second envelope. I had made a decision at the Clockwork Diner. I wouldn't open it alone in my apartment. If those secrets were going to be dragged into the light, they would be opened in front of the people who had buried them. The mediation suite was located on the second floor of a legal building at the county seat. A long mahogany table divided the room, and our family. At the head of the table sat the mediator, a retired circuit judge with half-moon glasses and the cold patience of a stone wall. Patricia and her attorney sat on one side. Seated directly beside Patricia, in chairs they had consciously chosen to occupy, were my mother and my father. My grandmother would have called it blocking. She had directed the high school theater productions for 20 years. She knew that Where You Stand tells the entire story. Cynthia and I took our seats on the opposing side. Cynthia began unhurried, laying out our case piece by piece, the highlighted bank statements, the 55 Zallos and an unpaid promissory notes, the Oakwood Valley chart documenting active delirium on February 11th, the visitor log proving the witnesses were never there, the sworn deposition of Arthur Pendleton, Miriam's affidavit, Alastair Vance's certified backup files. I didn't watch the mediator, I watched my Aunt Patricia. I watched her do the exact thing she had done her entire life. She calculated. Her eyes tracked every exhibit like a cashier auditing a register, searching for the loophole, the mathematical equation that would keep her on top. They counted everything except what actually counted. Her lawyer requested a 15-minute recess. When they returned, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Her attorney spoke in the hushed, cooperative tones of a man trying to douse a fire. He proposed a comprehensive settlement, the nursing board complaint, withdrawn by Friday afternoon with a formal letter of retraction, the civil suit, dismissed with prejudice, gone forever. I would receive 50% of the Sycamore Ridge property's value upon sale. Half. Then Patricia's lawyer stepped back, and my mother took her cue. It was a carefully choreographed sequence, and her role was the emotional trap. She reached across the polished wood and took my hand. We can be a family again, Phi. Sunday dinners, holidays, just like before. Your grandmother would have wanted us whole. I will tell you the absolute truth. It nearly broke me. 35 years of desperate longing, wrapped in my mother's warm grip. I could smell the roast chicken. Then Patricia's lawyer cleared his throat and read the final stipulations. All original documents must be surrendered. A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement covering all matters of the estate. And he paused, and my father's eyes locked onto the table. Any materials not yet formally filed or produced, including any sealed items, the envelope. They knew about it because I had let my father see my silence at the diner. They were offering me half a house and my mother's love in exchange for a sealed envelope none of them had the courage to read. Beneath the table, it sat in my bag like a ticking clock. Protect yourself first, my darling. For the first time, I understood the word first. Before their peace, before his reputation, before the illusion of family, I asked the mediator for a moment. Then I reached into my bag. I placed the thick, sealed envelope on the polished mahogany. I looked at it. The final heavy medication I had hoped to keep locked in the cabinet. My mother's hand was still hovering, reaching for mine. My father had turned the color of ashes. Fiona, he whispered, his voice trembling. Think about what you're doing. I did. I thought of 12 hour night shifts and a scraped off-name tag. I thought of an 85-year-old woman ordering her own bank records from an ICU bed because she knew nobody was coming to defend her. I tore the envelope open in front of all of them and dealt the pages out like a teacher distributing an exam. Photocopies of power of attorney checks, bearing Patricia's signature, her loopy initials. And on the back of 2 large wire transfers, where a secondary family signature was required to authorize the transaction, my father's signature, in his distinct, shaky handwriting. And then the letter, a single page, handwritten, dated late January, from my father, Thomas Harlow, to Genevieve in her hospital bed. I can't sign Patricia's papers, Mom. Just keep the peace. Don't leave a mess for us to clean up. Fiona will manage. She always does. Fiona will manage. She always does. I read that single line aloud twice in the calmest, most clinical voice I possess. I watched my mother slowly withdraw her hand from the table, folding it into her lap like a recalled product. The room was utterly silent. No shouting. Real betrayal doesn't scream. It just suffocates. There was only the sound of the mediator's pen, the court reporter's steady breathing, and my father staring at his own ink as if it were a death warrant. No deal, I said. No 50%, no non-disclosure. The legal record will be corrected. Every single page in a public courtroom if necessary. That was her final directive. It is also mine. I slid the entire file across the wood to the mediator. I knew the price of that motion the moment it left my hands. You cannot hand a referee your father's crimes and expect to remain his daughter. I chose the truth. I lost my father, and I would make that exact trade again before you finish reading this sentence. It was Patricia who finally snapped. The pressure of 30 years of resentment finally blew the lid off. 6 years, she screamed, lunging forward, ignoring her attorney's hand on her arm. I took care of our father. I fed him with a spoon. 6 years of my life while you played golf and Mom clipped coupons. And when he died, do you know what they left me? A laminated prayer card. Not even a teacup. She wasn't looking at the lawyers. She was staring directly at me, and in that terrible brief moment I saw her clearly. A woman who had once been my age, standing in a dark kitchen at 3:00 a.m., calculating what her family owed her and realizing the ledger would never be balanced. This family has never once paid a woman for her labor, Patricia said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than her scream. So I paid myself. That's all I did. I took what I was owed. The room remained frozen. And here is what you must understand. Every word she said was absolutely true, and none of it excused what she had done to me. I looked at her, and I delivered the line I had carried like a lead weight since Thanksgiving. I am truly sorry for the girl you were, Patricia. I mean that. But you sent the bill to the wrong person. You told me I was just doing what family does. You were right, I was. Someone in this family had to. The mediator removed his glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose, and stood up. This mediation is concluded without resolution. We will proceed to probate court. It took 6 weeks, and the resolution arrived in 3 separate envelopes, Genevieve's ultimate sense of poetic justice. First, the probate court ruling. The February will was declared null and void due to fraudulent execution. The October settlement was vacated. The 2-year-old will drafted by Alistair Vance was reinstated in its entirety. The house on Sycamore Ridge was deeded to me. The remaining liquid assets were split among the children, with a massive catch every single dollar Patricia had siphoned under the POA, along with the 55,000 in outstanding loans, was deducted directly from her share. Her inheritance didn't even cover the debt. My aunt ended that legal battle owing the estate money. Her civil suit against me vanished into thin air, and the probate judge referred the entire financial dossier to the county prosecutor under the state's elder exploitation statutes. That was the second envelope, a criminal investigation with her name on it. Her professional license was suspended, and her firm quietly forced her into early retirement by June. I didn't celebrate her ruin. Spend enough time around the dying, and you lose the stomach for watching anyone's life collapse, even when they laid the bricks themselves. The third envelope bore the emblem of the Oregon Board of Nursing. Complaint dismissed, unsubstantiated. My clinical director called me that same afternoon. Your patients have been asking when you're coming back, Fiona. I returned on a Monday. My badge, my medical cart, my night shift. The quiet, honest kingdom of my profession. As for my father, the prosecutor declined to press charges. The 2 forged endorsements weren't enough to build a criminal case. But his handwritten letter remains in a public court archive, indexed under his name forever. He and my mother moved to a different parish. He hasn't spoken to me since. The price of that mahogany table remains paid, and I am not sorry. I moved back into the house on Sycamore Ridge in the late spring, just as the wild roses over the cellar doors were blooming. People ask if I changed the locks on the front door. I didn't. Instead, I moved the bookcase. I carried it up from the cellar, one heavy shelf at a time, and reconstructed it in the living room by the front window. The old paperbacks, the encyclopedias, all of it. The steel safe sits on the bottom shelf now. The door is swung wide open. Empty. Anyone who enters can look inside. Nothing in this house is hidden anymore. My mother sent me a text in April. Your father's health suffers whenever your name is mentioned. I wrote back that I loved them, that my door was always open, and that I would not be offering an apology. It took me 4 drafts to make it that brief. I've received no reply, and I have made my peace with the silence. It is honest, which is more than their Sunday dinners ever were. Miriam comes by most Thursdays. She claims it's for my coffee, which we both know is a lie because my coffee is terrible. She waters the houseplants, tells me about her other patients, and sits in Genevieve's favorite armchair as if the fabric remembers her. Alistair Vance sent a package on November 12th. a book of advanced acrostic puzzles. Written on the inside cover in his elegant script, she would be proud. AV. I completed the first puzzle that night in ink, refusing to reach for a pencil. The house is quiet, but it's a clean quiet. It isn't waiting for a storm anymore. Neither am I. This New Year's Eve, every single light on Sycamore Ridge was burning. Miriam came with her 2 children, who discovered the old laundry chute within an hour, their laughter echoing through the halls. Mrs. Delgado came. I had cared for her husband during his final nights at the hospital, and she has no other family in the state. Cynthia stopped by for a glass of cider and a few battle stories. We drank sparkling white grape juice from the antique crystal flutes, and the children toasted with their entire arms. At 11:59 p.m., I stepped into the living room alone for a brief moment. The green leather journal rests on the shelf now, right next to the open safe. I turned to the final page, to her steady, indelible script. They counted everything except what actually counted. A year ago, I would have had nothing to say. This year, I took her heavy pen from the drawer, and I wrote one single line beneath hers. So I stopped counting, Grandma. I just set more chairs. Through the glass, I could see the snow settling on the wild rose bush outside the cellar doors. Somewhere in Burlington, I'm told, Patricia is suing her own legal team, still auditing a world that didn't pay her what she wanted. The moral ledger continues. It just doesn't run through this house anymore. At midnight, the kitchen erupted. One of Miriam's kids blew a paper horn directly into my ear, and it was the most beautiful sound my family never made. My grandmother taught me that in some families, love is a ledger, and the only way to win is to close the book and set a bigger table. That is my story. A scheduled message at midnight, a safe with my birthday on the dial, a second envelope I prayed I would never have to open. If this story found you on a night when you were the one left out in the cold, remember this: being excluded from the wrong table is simply an invitation to construct your own. Subscribe to their secret stories so you never miss what quiet people do when they finally decide to stand up. And tell me in the comments, would you have opened that second envelope sooner?